6 feet apart, 6 feet apart. It's the newest thing to do. Stay 6 feet apart, 6 feet apart. The distance between me and you. 6 feet apart, 6 feet apart. And when I say I'll keep you very close to my heart, it's purely metaphorical. These times are quite historical. So step aside, let's live our lives 6 feet apart.
Hello, welcome to Friday Fright Night. We're so glad that you're here. This is brought to you by 6 Feet Apart Productions. I'm your host, Regina Stoops, but tonight I'm coming to you from my witch's lair, and I'm going to go by my witch name, which is Raven. And well, it used to be Stark Raven, but that was a little long, so I'm just shortening it to Raven. That's what I'll be going by tonight. And I'm so glad that you're here. I'm a little new to witches. I just graduated from witch school, you know, that school, witch school. And hence the reason is I got the graduation robe. And I just got my new broom, pretty excited about it. I just have my learner's permit. I haven't gone to the Department of Witch Vehicles yet to try to get my license, but I'm pretty excited about having this as well. So thanks for joining us. And thanks for joining us here. We're very excited about tonight. Tonight, you're going to hear 4 spooky tales told by 4 excellent storytellers. And we're very excited to bring you these tales, and tales to make you think, make you shiver, make you sleep with the light on, perhaps. 4 storytellers. Now, no language that's X-rated, but we can't really be sure what's going to happen. So if you've got really, really little ones in the room, you might want to consider that. We know that this is a very different experience, okay, than live theater. So we want you to get in the mood. So please silence your cell phones and sit back, relax, maybe turn the lights down a bit. Grab yourself a favorite cup of whatever your witch's brew is. And hang on, be prepared to go on a spooky, adventurous ride. Thank you for coming. First up tonight, before I do that, I want to show our audience. What am I thinking? Let's take a look at the audience, everybody. We got some folks in costume. Everybody. Woo, woo, woo. Shout out to the audience. All right, thank you. We are so happy you're here. First up tonight is a storyteller, author, musician whose repertoire of tales told in a fusion of poetry and prose. She mixes the music and the spoken word. She's been featured in major storytelling festivals throughout the United States and abroad. She's a recipient of the Circle of Excellence Award from the National Storytelling Network. Please give a spooky warm welcome to Heather Forrest.
Thank you. I have a ghostly legend from Hungary for you this evening. No one wept when the old miser died. He was a mean old man. No one cried. They buried him in a vault and thanked goodness he was gone. Till the night they heard his mournful song. It's the ghost's gold. Do your good before you're gone. When you're dead, it's too late. Do it now. Don't wait. It's the ghost's gold. Doors would open and close by themselves. Dishes would fly around the rooms off their shelves. Doors would creak, shutters would moan. No one dared to sleep alone. At night, the women would feel cold fingers tickling their toes. It's the ghost's gold. What's the ghost's gold? What's the ghost's gold? What's the ghost's gold? Said the father to the mother and the sister to the brother and each to each other, but no one knew what it was. This strange song that kept the household awake. The old mistress said, well, it must have something to do with the freshly dead. Some wretched soul who finds no peace where he rests. Maybe it has something to do with the old miser we just buried. Oh, he did love gold. But what did he do that he cannot rest? And why must he torment us so? The living cannot help the dead. Be off with your dreadful woe. But each night they heard, it's the ghost's gold. No one liked the old miser, except Hans, his coachman. Hans had served the old man for 40 years and had grown fond of him. But Hans couldn't sleep at night. The crashing they heard, the sound of broken glass, the wailing and the moaning and the song kept him awake. And so he went to the mistress of the house and said, I cannot bear another night without sleep. Please, let me go and visit the dead man in his grave. Maybe I can discover why he cannot rest. Visit the dead? Visit the dead? How do you suppose to do that, Hans? The mistress said. Oh, Hans had a plan. A coffin was built exactly the size of Hans, and quite alive. Hans was placed in it. Would-be pall-bearers carried him out to the family vault on Graveyard Hill, and they placed his coffin down next to the old miser's casket. And then they scurried off saying, oh, I wouldn't spend the night in a place like this. Oh, no, it's dank, it's damp, and it makes the hair on the back of my neck stick up like hackles. Good luck to him. And off they went. And Hans lay still as stone, waiting for what might happen next. At midnight, he heard it. He was sure of it. The coffin beside his was opening. He opened his coffin as well. His own wide eyes saw the dead man rise and turn to him and say, be you among the living, or be you among the dead? I'm dead. Don't you recognize me, sir? I served you so faithfully for 40 years. I was your coachman. I'm Hans. You know me. Yes, I served you in life, and now I've come to serve you in death as well. Ah, yes, Janos. My good man, come with me. Come with me. I am bound to torment the household. And Hans watched as the ghost floated out of the mausoleum door. Hans climbed out of his coffin and scampered after the apparition as it floated down the hill toward the manor house. When they arrived at the great house, Hans watched in amazement. The ghost floated through the wall. Hans climbed in a window, and he watched as the ghost floated from room to room and finally stopped in the cupboard where it began to sing. It's the ghost's gold. Do your good before you're gone. When you're dead, it's too late. Do it now. Don't wait. It's the ghost's gold. Oh, and then the ghost took a great crystal bowl off of the shelf, threw it in the air, and it crashed on the ground, and it broke into 1,000 shards. And then the ghost waved his hand over the broken pieces, and they rose up. They reassembled themselves and placed themselves back on the shelf where they had been. The ghost took a glass plate and handed it to Hans. Here, Hans, amuse yourself. Wake them up. Let them be as restless as I am. Hans took the dish and did just as the ghost had done. He threw it in the air and it crashed. It broke into 1,000 pieces, and Hans waved his hand in the air, and the pieces stayed right where they were. Be you among the living, or be you among the dead? I'm dead. I just haven't had much practice at it, sir. Besides, I'm a bit confused. It's my first night, you know, and I thought maybe you could explain a bit, like explaining things. The sounds, that's it. The crashing, that's it. Why do you break the glass? Why do you crash and make sounds that wakes everyone up? Why do you sing that song about the ghost's gold? And what's the ghost's gold? The ghost's gold. Oh, I now know. Yes, it's the gold my father gave me on his deathbed. I was to deliver it to an orphanage that raised him. But there was so much of it. I kept it. And I kept it a secret as well. And now I am dead and I cannot tell. It can do no one any good. For not a living soul knows that I buried it in the basement. Where in the basement, sir? The ghost led Hans down the dank steps to the cellar of the great manor house, and there in a moldy corner the ghost waved his hand in the air, and the ground cracked open, and up out of the abyss rose a black cauldron filled with golden coins. At that moment the cock crowed, and the ghost vanished. The cauldron disappeared, and Hans found himself alone. In the cellar of the great house, he went upstairs and quickly woke up everyone in the house, and with sharp shovels they came down into the cellar, and they dug in the place where he pointed, and sure enough, they found a big black cauldron. It was filled with golden coins. Oh, at first the family thought they were even richer than before, but no. Hans said, "If you would ever sleep the night through again, you must take this gold to where it was intended." And so they delivered that gold to the orphanage that had raised the miser's father. And when the gold was brought to where it was intended, that night no ghostly song was heard. The dishes remained on the shelves where they had been placed, and the ghost was never heard from again, except once. Hans told his grandchildren when he was a very old man that one night he heard a voice in his dream. It said, "Do your good before you're gone. When you're dead, it's too late. Do it now. Don't wait. Thank you," was all he heard. Thank you.
Lovely.
Hey, hey, great story. Great,
That was
great.
lovely.
Wonderful.
That was wonderful. Great. Oh, that was lovely. That, high five for that. That was great. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. We are going to keep this spooky, hang on a second, thing going and introduce our next storyteller. He is British, as you'll find out when he starts to speak, of course. He's an award-winning British storyteller who's been entertaining audiences for over 15 years. He's performed all over hundreds of schools, colleges, libraries, festivals, and I like to think a graveyard or two, but I'm not sure. But please, a warm, two-handed welcome to Simon Brooks.
There was once, a very long time ago, a young woman who had long golden hair. She was bright, intelligent, and she was kind and compassionate. She had many suitors because of this, but there was one whom she loved the most, one whom she loved only, and that was the farmer's boy. But there was this count who fell in love with this girl. Well, actually, it wasn't her that he fell in love with, but it was her golden hair that he fell in love with. It was that which he desired most. Well, he tried to win her heart, but she kept refusing him. She told her parents that it was the farm boy that she truly loved, and it was him she wanted to marry. There was no way that she was going to give her heart to that count. Well, the parents argued with her, pleaded with her, and eventually they told her that she had to marry the count, for the count was wealthy and would be able to take care of her, whereas the farm boy would not be able to. They told the count this girl was in love with the farm boy, and the count made a plan. His plan was to kill the farm boy and take him out of the picture. It was quite simple, really. Now, this count, being very, very wealthy, if something ever came to court, he was bound to win against a poor farmer's lad. He told his friends, sycophants mostly, people who just cling to the coats of others, hoping that they will rise. And this count was the kind of man that trod on everybody so that he could get himself ahead. So he planned to kill this boy. One dark, dark night, he waited in the shadows of a bridge. And the farmer's lad was coming back home late from the market, and the count set upon him. But the farmer's lad was a strong lad, and he fought back. He did not know who his assailant was. He fought back strong and hard and was able to pull a small knife out of his boot and protect himself. And in protecting himself, he killed the count. Dragging the body out under the streetlights, he saw who he had murdered in self-defense and knew that if anybody found out that it was him, then he would be hung. Even if he pleaded in self-defense, the count's friends would have him hung anyway. So he immediately got home, got on his grey horse, and rode to his sweetheart, the girl with the golden hair. He threw stones up at her window and called her down, and she came down and she asked what was wrong. I have killed the count. He has friends in high places. If I am caught, I shall be hung. And even if I'm acquitted, he has evil friends and they will kill me anyway. I shall flee. When I have made my fortune, when I think it's safe for me to return, I shall come back in disguise and you and I can be together. I promise. You're going to leave? I have to. My life is in danger. Just look for the grey horse and myself. I shall be back as soon as I can. And off he rode. Tears fell down both of their faces. A year passed. She heard no word. 2 years passed and still no word. But on the anniversary of the 3rd year, when she was at the market, she felt something slipped into her hand. It was a piece of paper. She looked, there was a little boy who was running off. She opened up the piece of paper and it was a note from her true love, from the farmer's boy. He was now an artisan. He had made his wealth. He would come and collect her at midnight that night. Watch out for the grey horse. Watch out for him. She smiled at the note. My heart beats so fast. I'm so excited to see you once more. My heart might arrive before me. She liked that. Well, she went home and she packed the few things that she could into a small bag. And then she waited for her parents to fall asleep. And then she got up and got dressed herself. And she waited at the window, looking out, waiting and waiting. The sun had set and the moon was now out. And then she could hear in the distance. And then she could see the shape of the grey mare, with her true love on it, his cloak flapping in the wind, the bright moonlight falling down upon him. Her heart leapt out of her chest as if it was going to rise up to the moon. She gathered her baggage and quietly tiptoed downstairs. She put her shoes on and stepped outside to wait for him. Clouds covered the moon and the darkness fell across the land. The horse came to a stop. He reached down his hand and pulled her up behind him. He took the bag of hers and put it on his lap. She put her arms around his waist and held him tight, and they rode off into the night. As they traveled, they passed a graveyard, and as they passed, she heard these words calling out to her, "Aren't you afraid, girl of the living?" She turned and looked back to the graveyard. Why should I be frightened? She called out. I have my true love. On and on they went. They rode onwards and onwards, miles after mile, going beneath the horse's hooves. They passed another graveyard, and again that call came out. Aren't you afraid, living girl? Why should I be afraid? I am with my true love. On and on they rode. The third graveyard they passed. Beware the dead. Aren't you afraid, living girl? Why should I be afraid? But then the moon was exposed by the clouds, moving away. The rider, his hood flew back, and she saw, to her horror, that it was the Count, his dead body, that was riding a grey mare. It was he who was leading her away. You are not my true love. She tried to get off the horse, and as she leapt from the horse, the Count grabbed hold of her hair and grabbed her, holding her tight. Her body hit the side of the horse. She tried to twist around, screaming out into the night, pushing herself away from the side of the horse in case she fell and was trampled to death beneath those hooves. The Count just clung to the hair that he loved so dear, and the horse rode on. She screamed again and again, the horse beating against her, her hands pushing against the horse so she wouldn't fall. She grabbed hold of the Count's hand and screamed. And then she heard the sound of other hooves. They were getting closer. They were coming from a different direction towards her. And then she could see in the moonlight that this was another grey mare. This was her beau. This was her sweetheart. She could see his face now. He called her name and she called his. Then the light seemed to get brighter, and she turned and looked, and before the horse was this huge wall of fire. The gates of hell were opening up. Quickly, quickly, she cried. Her beau got faster and faster on his horse. He drew his sword, and as he got closer and closer, he reached out his hand. She reached out hers. But the Count veered away. Again, the boy, the farmer, he got closer and closer and closer. And once more, he reached out his hand. She grabbed it, and he swung the blade of his sword and severed her hair. And he drew the horse to a halt as she fell and hit the side of the horse. And the Count galloped through the gates of hell. One might say that he got what he wanted, after all. The golden hair that he loved so much. And she got her beau, and her beau got her. I like to think they lived happily. This isn't the end of the story. Not quite. You see, the Count had hundreds of acres of land. And after he had been murdered, the servants left, there was no one to pay them. The groundskeepers left, there was no one to pay them. And two hungry men. They were in a pub one night. They were talking. And they said that this county owns all this land and there's bound to be deer there. Maybe wild boar. We can go and hunt there and find some food. Their friend said, no, don't do that. It's the Count's land. It's supposed to be haunted. What is there to be frightened of with ghosts? They just howl and shiver. They weren't to be scared. That night they went. There was no moon. That night, 2 screams were heard. Terrible, terrible screams, so petrifying that people that heard those screams, they shut their doors and shutters on their windows and bolted them tight. The next morning, when the sun was bright up in the sky, a clergyman and a group of men went into the woods where the 2 men had said they were going to hunt. They found them both. The one was already dead. It looked like his face had been sucked from him, his eyes staring, his hands clawed. They were going to bring him home to give him a proper burial, but the way his eyes stared and the expression on his face, they were too frightened, so they buried him where they found him. The other man, that they had to grab him from behind. He was screaming. His face was sallow, pale, his eyes wide with fright. He kept clawing at things in front of him, things that nobody else could see. They roped him, tied him down, and brought him back to his home. He lived no longer than 2 more weeks. Not long after that, the house burned down to the ground mysteriously. But nobody ever ever hunted on those grounds again. The Count in golden hair.
Wow.
Awesome. Great story. Great
Yeah.
story.
Yay, thank
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
you.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. Oh, yay. Hi 10 to you. That was great. Thank you so much, Simon. Thank you for that story and that lovely accent and the black and white motif, making it all the more spooky. Hey, I want to give a shout out to some of the folks that are watching on YouTube. We've got some people from Montana and Colorado. So the mountain zone is represented because they're usually not represented that well. So good on you for representing Mountain Standard Time. And someone from Illinois, my hometown, that's where this witch was born, Illinois. Woo, woo. I know we got some other fans from Illinois. So if you're in the chat, shout out, give these folks some love. We're getting a lot of good response for these awesome storytellers. Also in the chat, you'll find the websites of the storytellers. You want to find more information about them? That's the best place to find it. Okay, we're going to keep this going. Our third storyteller is a musician and a storyteller, and she's passionate about finding the most beautiful myth, folk tales to present. And she weaves her story and her music and just presents beautiful stories. But tonight it's going to be beautifully scary. She is the producer of the Story podcast. So please give a big scary fright night welcome to Rachel Ann Harding.
Yay. Hey.
The first time Aaron Kelly saw Adeline sing in church, he started to follow her around like a lamb after its mother. Now, he was more the wolf than the lamb, but Adeline didn't seem to notice because he asked her to dance at every dance and he swept her off her feet. She married him. Boy, was that a mistake. After that, people didn't see her very often. It was usually at church and maybe one or two dances. The first time Adeline and Aaron Kelly went to a dance after they had been married, and a strange man asked Adeline to dance. Well, that man ended up with a broken jaw, Adeline with a few bruises herself. Men stopped looking at Adeline altogether, not wanting to incur the wrath of Aaron Kelly. Adeline, she dealt with it. She learned how to pick her battles. She learned what food he liked to keep him calm, what songs made him laugh and dance. 3 years after they were married, Aaron Kelly died. No one really knows what killed him, though some say he was so rotten, it just ate away at his core. At the funeral, no one looked at Adeline, and Adeline, she wore the black for a year. She went to church, she tended her farm. But after a year, she threw off the black, and it was as if she threw off the past. She showed up to that first dance wearing a new blue dress, and men got whiplash doing a second take. They only made an orderly line to ask her to dance because they were still a little worried what Aaron Kelly might think. Well, Adeline didn't care. She danced with every single man who asked her, and she only toned it down just a little bit when people called her Widow Kelly. It wasn't long before Lee Carter started to court her. Now, it made sense to everybody. His farm was right next to hers. He was a nice man. They understood why they could see a future together. And after a few months of walking out together, Adeline organized a harvest dinner with a few friends and Lee Carter because she thought there was a question that he might want to ask her. After dinner, as they sat sipping coffee and enjoying cake and talking about the yield of corn and other such nonsense, Lee, he stood Lee stood, he straightened his coat, he looked at Adeline. Widow Kelly, sweet Adeline, I've got a question for you. No one knows what that question might have been, because at that moment there was a banging at the door. It was loud and insistent, and then a long scrape. The doorknob turned, and there stood the corpse of Aaron Kelly, or what was left of it. There were bits of flesh hanging off his bones. His whiskers hung in clumps, and he drug himself into the room and glared at Lee Carter. Now, Aaron Kelly didn't have eyes to glare anymore. The worms had eaten them long ago, but everybody could feel it as he stared across the room, and the room erupted. Dishes were thrown, women screamed, men fainted, then picked themselves up and threw themselves out the windows. Lee, to his credit, he stood in front of Adeline. Adeline, Widow Kelly, I'm going to go now. Goodbye. Forever. He turned and he threw up into his hat, and then he jumped out a window himself. Now, Adeline, she sat quietly through the whole thing. And when the screams had faded into the night, she looked at Aaron Kelly. You're supposed to be dead, old man. Go back to your grave. But Aaron, he had Adeline in life, and he wanted to make sure that she was his forever. You know, our vow said, until death do us part, you're dead, now depart. And Aaron's shoulders shook as if he were laughing, and then he dragged himself over to a rocking chair by the fire. He settled in and he began to rock. And there he sat, and there he rocked. It wasn't long before the suitors stopped showing up. It's a little difficult to be romantic with a woman when her corpse of a husband is sitting and glaring from the fireplace. Adeline, she dealt with it. She went to church. She went to the dances, though no one asked her to dance anymore. They were worried that Aaron Kelly might show up at their house. So she sat there through the whole dance, tapping her foot and waiting. Now, it might have been that way until Adeline died. Every time she walked in the house, she put wax in her ears so she couldn't hear that insistent of him rocking in the chair by the fire. Yes, it might have been that way until she joined him in her own grave, if it hadn't been for Isaiah Jefferson. Now, Isaiah, he was a banjo player, and he had been traveling around for about 10 years with a traveling band from town to town. And he thought it was about time to settle down and have a home. And whenever he thought about settling down, he thought about this little town that they visited every year, about this woman who was as cute as a chickadee, and she had a voice like a nightingale. And so when they visited that town a little later in the season, he looked for her. And there she was, sitting in a blue dress, looking real pretty, but no one was asking her to dance. He handed the music off to the other band members. He went and he held out his hand, and she leapt into his arms. She fit better there than his old banjo, and he made up his mind that night. The next day, he went to buy himself a new hat. That's what you do when you're courting, I suppose. And there it was at the general store. The people got around to telling him about Adeline's unusual situation. He thought it over. He had sung a lot of songs, and a lot of them had the dead coming back. And so maybe, he figured, he was in the middle of a new song that was about to be written. So it was the next day at church. He approached Adeline with his new hat. He took it from his head. Adeline, Widow Kelly, I'd like to come visit you tonight. Adeline looked him up and down. I suppose you know about my situation. Yes, I do. And that corpse beside your fire, why, he's cold and stiff, and I'm not. Perhaps it's appropriate there's a chaperone when I come to visit. And she looked at him again and said, well, I'd love to see you this evening then. Now, that evening, Isaiah walked down the road with the banjo in his hand. He came up to the door, and there she opened it, looking as pretty as a sunset. He stepped in, and there was Aaron Kelly sitting by the fire, looking a little decomposed. Adeline introduced the two of them. Isaiah Jefferson, this is my husband, late husband, Aaron Kelly. Aaron Kelly, this is Mr. Isaiah Jefferson. He has come to play us some music tonight. Isaiah nodded. Good evening, sir. You are looking a little bit depressed and decomposed. I'd be more than happy to play you some music. Adeline, will you sit and sing with me? And so Isaiah began to play. And as he began to play, he noticed that Aaron Kelly was starting to tap his foot. And as Adeline began to sing, she saw that too. Hangman, hangman, slack up your rope, oh, slack it for a while. I looked down yonder to see Pa coming, he's walked a many long mile. Say, Pa, oh, Pa, have you brung me any gold to pay my fee? Or have you walked these many long miles, see me on the hanging tree? And as she sang, Aaron Kelly pulled himself up out of his chair. He began to dance and swirl around the room, and bits of him began flying off this way and that. As Adeline launched into the second verse, hangman, hangman, slack up your rope, oh, slack it for a while. I looked down yonder to see Ma coming, she's walked a many long mile. Say, Ma, oh, Ma, have you brung me any gold to pay my fee? Or have you walked these many long miles, see me on the hanging tree? And as she sang that verse, well, his bones on his feet started to fall off and scatter around the floor like marbles. Soon he was dancing quite literally on his knees, and then those fell off, and then he was dancing on his hips as she went on to the third verse. Hangman, hangman, slack up your rope, oh, slack it for a while. I looked down yonder to see my love, she's walked a many long miles. True love, have you brung me any gold to pay my fee? Or have you walked these many long miles, see me on the hanging tree? Yes, love, I've brung you gold, I've gold to pay your fee. And I have come to take you home, and we shall married be. And as she came to the end of the song, Aaron Kelly was dancing on his ribs. They popped off one by one until it was just his head. His jaw snapped twice, fell off, and was still. And there, among the bits and the bones of her husband, Adeline kissed Isaiah Jefferson. They were married. But that was a few weeks later, after they had taken 3 sacks, flour sacks. They put his bones into those 3 sacks. They buried one at the church, one at the bar, and one at the dance hall. They put heavy rocks over those 3 sacks with the bits and pieces, hoping he would rest quietly now. And yes, she married him. It's not every day that you meet a man who will bury a body with you on the first date. And they still go to every dance. Isaiah, he plays. Adeline, she sings. And as far as we know, no one else has fallen apart.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yes.
oh, well told.
Yeah.
That's great.
So good.
Beautiful.
Yay, great story, great
Well
story. Lovely. Wonderful story. Oh, I love that story. You know, I mean, it seems a lot of these spooky tales have to do with broken relationships or bad relationships, but I just want to say that I, for one, this is a mixed marriage. I mean, I'm alive and he's not, but so far it's working because I think having a spouse that can't talk to you is sometimes a good thing. So, but thank you for that story. We're going to bring up our fourth storyteller. She is a internationally known master storyteller, and she's a published author as well, an educator. She has been in this biz telling stories, educating people for over 33 years. She travels the world doing workshops, giving performances. In fact, she is going to be performing at the Scottish International Storytelling Festival, and that is going to be this Saturday. And if you Google that, I'm sure you'll find it. But also that is at 3 p.m. Eastern. So for you folks in Mountain Time, I believe that's 1 o'clock. And she's also going to be doing a fundraiser for Artists Standing Strong Together. These are organization that's raising funds to help artists in this time so that they can keep doing the wonderful things that they do and telling these wonderful stories. And that is on Sunday. And that is going to be at 7:30 Eastern Time, 5:30 Mountain Time. And Mountain Time just never gets the attention it deserves. So that's why I'm emphasizing Mountain Time. All right, let's give a big woo, 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 warm welcome to Donna Washington.
Well, there was once a merchant, and he had the gift of gab. Oh, he could talk you out of or into anything. And he became very, very rich. And then he looked around and realized he'd forgotten to get married. He had nobody to leave his wealth to, no one to share his great joy in selling things. And he traveled the world looking for someone who could share his joy of speaking and talking people into and out of things. And he found himself in a marketplace, and a young man walked up to him and told him such a great story that he gave him a coin. And as he was leaving, the young man told someone else a completely different story that was just as wonderful. And he stopped and listened. Now, this young man was a beggar. He was bedraggled, and he was very young. And so the merchant figured, who's going to miss him? So he took him and raised him as his own. And this young man grew up in this wonderful house with all of the luxuries after having been so poor for the first part of his life. And he took to that merchant's ways very, very well. And as he grew up, he became quite a handsome young man. And the two of them traveled the world, selling and buying things. And finally, the merchant said, as you get older, remember to get married. Remember to find some joy in this life. And the young man said, I'm already having myself a good time. This is more joy than I ever thought I would have. No, the merchant said, it's important. Get married. Oh. Well, as the old man got older and his young apprentice / son became even better at what he did, they were traveling together and it was getting cold. And they came to a place where they were to take a ferry. But when they got there, it was getting dark, and they could see that the ferryman was about halfway across that lake. Well, they thought he'll come back at some point. And they lit the beacon to let him know that they were there. And they went into the ferryman's little hut to wait. And they both fell asleep. And while they were sleeping, a storm blew in, and it snuffed out the beacon, so the ferryman didn't know they were in there. And because they weren't planning to stay very long, they hadn't banked up the fire in his grate, and so it got cold in there. And that young man woke up, and he couldn't move. It was like the ice had gone into his bones. He thought about that old man laying over there, his master, his sort of father, and he felt bad for him, but he didn't want to get up. He pulled his own blankets a little tighter. It'll be fine. I'm sure he's fine over there. He pulled it tighter, but it didn't get warmer. In fact, it got colder and colder. And then the windows opened, and into the room floated a woman. She had white hair, and it moved about her body like a cloud. Her skin was pale, almost blue. And she went to the old man, and she caressed his face. And as she did, a single burst of cold air came out of him, and he went still. She turned and looked at the young man. Her eyes were like eggshells, empty, cold. And she approached him, and she reached out her hand to him. But before she could touch him, he started talking. He talked and talked and talked. He spoke of summer. He spoke of fruits ripe off the tree and the juice rolling down your chin. He spoke of flowers and the bouquets of spring. He spoke of the cherry blossoms, pink and beautiful, flitting through the air. He talked of everything he suspected this very cold woman had never seen before in her life. And he spoke of how amazing it was. And she stood there and listened and listened and listened. She got closer and closer, but she didn't touch him. She wanted to hear his voice. It was almost like she could feel him all through her, and he just talked. And then the first rays of the morning came through the window. She looked up and realized her time was over, and he smiled at her, and she said, "You listen to me. Don't you dare ever tell anyone what has transpired tonight. The second you do, I swear to you, I will come for you, and nothing you say will still me." That was an easy promise to make. And then she was gone. And then he heard the scrape of the ferryman's boat. And he came because he saw the horses, and he came in, and there was the old man dead. And the young man, eyes wide, staring. Well, the ferryman apologized. It's just that the wind had gotten so bad he couldn't come back. He didn't even realize there was anyone there. "Why didn't you light the beacon?" Well, they went back and forth about that, but it didn't matter because the young man knew one thing. With this old master dead, everything belonged to him. And he was going to live a fantastic life without anyone telling him what to do. Well, he traveled for a little ways, and about a year after his old master had died, he was going through the countryside, and he was selling his wares, and
Well, it looks like we've lost Donna.
Oh, yep, looks like she was telling the story of I'm a little concerned because I'm afraid perhaps the ice witch has gotten Donna. If she can thaw out and come back in, by all means, we'll welcome her. But wow, what timing. Am I right? There she is. All right, master storyteller. Donna, we were worried that you were frozen, that you had gotten by the ice witch. So, okay, I'm glad you're okay.
Where did it cut off? I don't even remember. Where did it cut off? What was I saying?
He had lots of money and he was going to live it up.
Oh, okay. Here we go. A year later, he was traveling to the countryside and he saw the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen before in his life. Her hair was raven black. Her eyes sparkled like stars. Her voice was amazing to listen to, and she smelled like summer. She was an orphan. She'd wandered in there lost and confused a while earlier, and they'd taken her in, and they were all keeping her. And when he said he wanted to marry her, they were happy for her. And he took her to his grand home, and they lived together quite happily for a long time. They had children, and he understood what the merchant had meant about living your life. And he lived it to the fullest. He spoiled his children. He had a whole bunch of them. 6 to be precise. And one night, when it was very cold, his wife was sitting by the fire, and she was weaving, and she was singing, and the wind was howling around the house. And he said to her, "You know, this reminds me of something." And she said, "Oh, really?" He said, "Yes, something that happened to me a really long time ago." And she said, "Husband, if it happened a long time ago and you've never thought to tell me, then no. He said, "I'm going to tell you." She said, "Oh, I don't think I even want to know. I don't even see. I'm going to tell you. Now be quiet and listen." All right. He said it was when I was with my old master, that silly old man who brought me in and kept me. And one night we got to this ferry station. Oh, husband, be quiet. I am talking to you. Very well. I don't know what your problem is tonight. Just listen. We got to this ferry station and we put the beacon out, and the old man and I went in, and we were asleep, and it got so cold. And he proceeded to tell her about the woman floating into the room and her hair everywhere. And he was so busy telling the story, he didn't see the black drain out of his wife's hair. And her face, he said, she was cold. She was so white, she was almost blue. He didn't see the summer drain out of his wife's face. And her eyes were like eggshells. They were gray and flat. He didn't see the life drain out of his wife's eyes. And then he proceeded to tell her how he had talked this woman down. And he started laughing about how clever he was. And normally his wife would be laughing too, but she didn't say anything. And even though it was summer, cold draft whipped through the room, and he looked over, and sitting by the fire was not his wife. It was the ice witch. And she turned to him and she said, "You fool. The promise between us was a bond that let me taste summer and feel the fruits and smell the flowers. It allowed me to be here with you. And you have ruined it. And I swore I would take you, but for the love I bear our children, I will leave you here now. But I swear to you, the second the last one has no need of you, I will come for you." And then she was gone. He never did remarry. He didn't travel either. He sent his sons out to do it. He spent all of his time locked in his study. He was kind, but he was never happy again. And always in the wintertime, he would go and sit outside and wait. But he always was alive when it was over. His last child, his daughter, was married when the cherry blossoms were losing their petals and the air was full of pink and red. And they found him the day after the wedding on a warm summer morning, frozen to death in his study. And that is the story of the Ice Witch.
Incredible.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry about the technical difficulties, but thank you.
Oh, well done.
Nice.
You did
Such a good
great.
story.
Totally worth
Great
that
story,
wait.
great
That was great.
story. I'm giving you a hand and a foot for that story. That was a great story. And I think actually it added to it. I love that you're telling the Ice Witch and you just froze completely. You know, there's no static, no, it's just like, I actually thought maybe it was part of the story. I'm like, maybe this is part of it and we just don't know about it. But wonderful story, Donna. Thank you very much. That was great. And thank you again to our audience members. I'm going to now hand it over to my esteemed co-producer, Claire Hennessy, and she is going to chat or bring up some folks from the audience, if anybody would like to be brought up from the audience. Backstage pass, if you dare.
I love our spooky, lovely unicorn, because obviously pink is a lovely color because my hair's pink at the back, not quite as gorgeously pink as you are, but I think, Christian, that is for me the best thing I've ever seen for ages. Thank you for dressing up. And Renee, I love your little hat. Can we show Renee? Hi Renee, you can
It's
unmute.
Joey, really.
I'm actually Joey. Renee's my daughter.
Oh,
My daughter is a reindeer.
Oh, bless. Lovely.
Aww.
Thank you. So thank you for dressing up, and thank you to our amazing storytellers. And I agree with Regina that it actually made it a bit spooky. Donna, that you just froze like your ice story. So anyway, so fantastic to come back in and just pick it up as if nothing had happened. Really impressive. So I'm going to pass you back to Regina, and thank you for coming, everyone.
So thank you very much. I mean, this has been, I swear, you know, my mind has been blown. My brain is like gone. And oh, in fact, here it is. So let me just put that back in there and carry on. So a reminder, I already mentioned Mindy Erlab's book launch, live or virtual. So check that out. That is October 30th. It's a Friday night. And we are 6 Feet Apart Productions. Track us down. If you're new, thank you so much for showing up. We hope to see you again. And have a wonderful, wonderful evening, whether you're driving or flying, however you're getting home. If you're just walking into the kitchen, be safe and have a wonderful evening. Thank you. There goes my brain.
And thank you all to our fantastic storytellers. Bye.
Yes.
6 feet apart, 6 feet apart. It's the newest thing to do. Stay 6 feet apart, 6 feet apart. The distance between me and you. 6 feet apart, 6 feet apart. And when I say I'll keep you very close to my heart, it's purely metaphorical. These times are quite historical. So step aside, let's live our lives 6 feet apart.